Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, the show for women who are seeking more fulfillment in life and simply not getting it from their current situation. We focus specifically on careers, but hey, we spend a lot of time in our careers, so making changes here will definitely create an impact in your overall happiness. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and my mission is to empower women to succeed. I believe that in order to powerfully own your career, you must decide and claim that you want to sit in the driver's seat. You must know that you deserve better and be willing to not only do the requisite work, but be willing to go out on a limb to ensure your success. Each episode focuses on profiling a leader who is clearly demonstrating ownership of their career. Join me and my guests as we explore career journeys and bring you actionable strategies to use to get into the driver's seat for your career. Because ultimately, your career is your responsibility. Let's get into the show. Danielle, it's been such a joy to get to know you this year. I'm so glad that you said yes to being on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Truly, I know your story is going to be so interesting and exciting for our listeners to learn about and just get some good nuggets around being in the driver's seat for your career. So tell us, as we get started, how did you get to the driver's seat?
Oh, good morning. Well, it's morning in California over here. Simone, thank you so much for having me. You are a powerhouse. You are an inspiration. So I'm so glad to be able to share some face time with you. I know we can't be in the same place, but I'm grateful for this exchange. Okay, so let's think about, you said driver's seat. Man, sometimes I'm like, am I really doing this adult thing? Am I really driving the car? When I was one of those persons that when I went to school, I was like, I want to do human services work. I want to work for the county. I want to do this. I thought I wanted to be a social worker. I thought I had all these ideas of what I thought I wanted to do. And I ended up going into education. And one of my mentors said to me, I think you should apply for this job that Rusty has. And I said, who's Rusty? She's like, my husband. I'm like, Rusty who? So she shows me. She's a small, petite Latina, and this is this over he's like 6'7", redhead at the time guy. And he was the executive director of the Orange County, our county Human Relations Commission. I was like, I did not know that man was your husband. And what is the Human Relations Committee? I had no idea. And she said, oh, Danielle, you'd be great. It's around social justice work. And I was like, what social justice? I mean, I didn't know nothing about nothing. But I went ahead and nervously applied, was granted a interview. You know, I think my mentor probably pulled a little bit of string. But there was, I learned later that there was about 80 people who applied for that position. And even in my green self, I showed up authentically because I didn't know how to strategize at that time. And I ended up being offered the job. And that was in 1995. I stayed there for almost 11 years. And in that time, I call it becoming an accidental activist, because this is where I really fueled myself. I had a background in sociology and education. Emmett Till was someone story that I was so moved and riveted and thought, I never really thought about hate in this way. I want to do something. And saying that statement out loud catapulted me to doing this work. That's why I said it was accidentally on purpose that I found myself doing social justice work and working with teachers. So I actually got to marry a passion and something I had actively trained for. And I stayed there and decided after about almost 11 years that it was time for me to do some policy and research for the state. So I went and did some policy and research for the state. And I found that as much as an introvert I am, that I really like people, because doing policy and research, though I made some contributions, it was creating a safety net for women and children who had substance abuse issues and had come from families with substance abuse issues, that I was able to do some incredible work with others, but I really missed the connection with people one-on-one. And so then I had an opportunity to go work for a national organization called the Anti-Defamation League. again, another civil human rights organization, one of the oldest and one of the largest across the nation. And I was, all the time that I was moving, I just kept moving up the chain. When I was at the commission, I went from specialist to director. I was their inaugural director of our education program, and I moved over and did a lateral move to a senior director level, and then an associate regional director with ADL. So I just kept moving up, and I think it was what I wanted to do. That was the trajectory. I didn't know what the end goal was, but I knew that I wanted to be in a position where I could do work and also have what I thought was some cachet with titles. That mattered back then. I went on to Planned Parenthood and did more policy work on behalf of women and families, and said I miss, even though this is social justice work, I really miss doing racial equity education, anti-bias, anti-racist education. And so I went on to work with another formerly national organization called the California Conference for Equality and Justice. And it used to be the National Conference of Christians and Jews when it was national. And so I stayed there for 7 years doing work that I love. I was able to build quite a few platforms around, ironically, hate crime and hate violence work and violence prevention. And I say ironically because I think about the impact of that work that still exists in these times where we are seeing our communities and families suffer at the hands of other folks who believe that there is a hierarchy of people and that it's okay to hurt and agitate and murder members of certain communities. So the impact has, as I watch and see what's unfolding, I'm like, thank you for putting me in a place where I could help to create work that would support families and communities and really create some activation around community centeredness and community building and even, community uprising in a nonviolent way. So all of that to say is this was my will and also the will of the universe saying, Danielle, you keep saying what you want. We're just going to keep pushing you in that way. And all through the time, Simone, it's not without bumps. Yes, I got to follow the path that I had set out, when I was 22 years old, fresh out of school. But I will say that the bumps along the way for me were really standing in my own power and not apologizing for having thoughts and ideas, and learning how to not play small when people forced or asked me to do that. And that was the real education there. The education of being a woman of color, being of smaller stature, just all of the things that go into play with deciding who gets to make decisions and who doesn't. And so I was very fortunate enough to do some of the heavy lifting and ask for folks to how do I get through some of these pieces? I want to lead. I'm ready to learn, but I also feel like I have something to offer. I want to be making decisions that are right for me. And in 2017, I made another huge life decision, and that really made me the CEO of my own life, because I thought I wanted to be a CEO of a company or organization. And once that was available, I no longer wanted it. And so I retired myself from nonprofit work after over almost 25 years and started my own consulting firm where every project that I take on is a passion project. And I'm now in a place where I can really lean back and assess, am I the right person for this job? Am I the right partner for this job? Are they the right partners for me in the way I want to execute this work? And I would say I've never been more in the driver's seat than I am now in taking those risks.
I love that journey. It introduced our listeners to your story, number one, but it was inspiring to hear just the different ways you poured, or how the dots connected to where you are today. So it still felt like you were in the driver's seat very early on as I listened to your story and the different opportunities that you experienced along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had lots of, I like to call them my angels, both seen and unseen, who were just moving me in this direction. I have a friend and mentor, Nikki Irvin, who changed my life with a single bump. We were at an event. We bumped, and it was tight quarters, and we bumped backs, and we were both holding drinks, and we turned around and said, sorry, there's not much room here. We ended up chatting, and I was introduced to the German Marshall Memorial Fellowship. And because of her, I applied, and out of national candidates, only a select, less than 100 are selected to participate in a transatlantic fellowship. And if it wasn't for Nikki, I never would have known about it, never would have gone for it. But that becoming a Marshall Fellow changed my worldview, my life, and put me even more so. If I was in the driver's seat already, it put my foot on the gas.
I love that analogy or that visual. It's really powerful. So you have taken a lot of risks, Danielle, in your career.
Oh,
What I'm hearing, tell us
yeah.
how you dance with risk, how you have over the past and how you do it now.
You know, I used to think I was risk adverse. Well, I think I was. I played safe. You know, I stayed close to home. I chose not to, I chose with heavy influence from the parents to not go away to school. So
I can relate to that.
you know, that those familial ties. So I didn't think I was a risk taker, but as I started looking, I was like, wow, I only choose spaces and places where I'm bound to be discomforted. I've never had a leisure like, oh, I just get to go into the office until now, because this is the space I create. But risk, I think it's something way more positive than it gets. You know, at first look, it gets a kind of like, that's really risky. But you know, I don't know who said this, but it's when you take that leap, and it's, I'm either gonna drop to the bottom or I'm gonna fly, and the next thing you know, here are your wings and you're flying. I just kind of am mindful that it always will work out. I know myself well enough. I know where I come from. I know what I'm made of. And I just have a deep faith that I know it will work out. Even if there's angst along the way, my faith tells me you can make this work. Other people do, you're no different. You got this too. And I think that, you know, that paradigm of you know, growing up as a person of color, I don't think it's a detriment. Other people make it such, like, oh, well, she's, you know, a person of color. Like, oh, I don't know how many times I was, oh, you speak English so well. I'm like, yeah, I'm from California, and that's my first language. Like, uh, but I think that our familial units like to keep us close because they know of what exists beyond the community. And I will say that's out of safety and care and education. And at the same time, I think on the other side of that is, I can do this too. I can do hard things too. I can live where I'm not always wanted or accepted. I can do these things too. I can find my space. I can belong.
Mm.
And I think that's what sort of kept me going, is that I wanted to live on my own terms, and I wanted to give and share in the way that I felt like made the most sense and impact for others. So that whole risk thing, I don't know. As I think about being the mom to a little boy, I think about, like, what are my conversations going to look like as I start to prepare him for big imaginative things, not just with his play, but in what's available for life. I hope I can set that example.
You already are. I am so inspired by your story. What would you say, just from your body of work, is your formula for successfully owning your career?
You know, I I think you got to own your stuff. You got to own your stuff. You've got to be able to know when your habits start showing up. My friends will say your slip is showing, and that's when my face will get crunky when I'm hearing something I don't want to hear, or you can tell that I'm already formulating responses to things I don't want to hear or see, or I've got to own that. I've got to own that. I've got to take pause. I've got to step back. I've got to listen before I make some judgments that are not my responsibility. I've learned early on that how people respond and how people act is out of my control. And the only thing that I really have control of is how I respond. So it took me a minute to learn that, but I will say once I took ownership of that and accepted accountability, things became a lot easier to navigate. And I would say being able to do that for the great things that we own and not play small, and also for when we make mistakes or step on someone's toes or inadvertently cause harm, that we can do right by that too. So I think that increases my authenticity, but it also reminds me that I still have much to learn and to grow, and that I can house big ideas and successful launches on my own as well, right? That I have good ideas that can be put into play, and I have a lot to learn still.
Wonderful. Have you come across resources that you can recommend to the audience just to help them to be in the driver's seat for their career?
I would say that, I guess it depends. Like as an educator, I look to lots of people who are doing ABAR education, anti-bias, anti-racist education, and really watching them stand their power helps me to stand in my own and to find my voice. I will say though, just as a person, that Brene Brown has been really positive for me. And she comes from a social work background. I come from sociology background. Her research on shame and really owning your own crap is really important to me and has been very pivotal. Christine Kane, who focuses on soulful business, is also someone who's been really helpful. She's coming out with a book, and so I'm eager to see that. But I've been part of her master classes, and she has a very big online presence. So those are two women. Ironically, there are two white women that I look to for the bigger entrepreneur pieces. But Nellie Galan, who is a real estate mogul, and she also was one of the first news anchors who then bought her own business, like Univision, I think. She's tremendous. She's a powerhouse. She's telling us to not buy those $300 shoes, but to buy buildings.
I love it. I didn't know that. I'm familiar with the name, but I didn't connect the dots that way. That's inspiring.
Yeah. So when I think of Nellie, who's also, she's just a powerhouse, that I think of, don't buy the shoes, buy the building.
Nice.
So she feeds that part of my soul, and Brene and Christine feed this other piece around really looking in deeply and addressing things that feel uncomfortable. So all of those three women sort of help me move and step into my power.
I love that. As we begin to wrap up, are there any parting words of advice that you can give to our listeners to successfully own their careers?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I'm a work in progress, but what I will say is what is serving me really well is, and advice that I give those that I coach with, is to take time and pause and reflect on where you are in this moment. I think that as Westerners, as Americans, we find ourselves cultivating and curating the art of busyness, sort of like it's a trophy on our mantle. But really what it is that when we're so busy, we're not able to slow down enough to hear what's being asked for, to hear what you're being called to. And I think that that's really important, to be able to hear what we are being called to. You can ignore the call, but I can't imagine what can be when people start slowing down and actually hearing their calling. And where they need to go next to make it happen. So I would say, be honest about who you are and where you are, and take pause and decide if this is exactly where you want to be, and this is the place that brings me the most joy. Because I think that business and thriving lives all around are possible. I don't think that business has to be hard. I think we can let it be easy, but in order to do that, we really have to be able to reflect on what we want to invite in.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. As I just came off a little mini vacation, I'm in full agreement with what you're saying, Danielle. So much wisdom. It's been such a pleasure sharing your story. Can you tell our listeners how to stay connected with you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I find myself on Instagram so much. So you can find me at D Nava Consulting. It's nothing jazzy. D Nava Consulting. Or you can find me at my website too. There's a link there too. You can even set up some time to talk with me if you like, if you have questions. DanielleNavaConsulting.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm remembering your Instagram feed and that wonderful shirt you were just wearing. I've got to get one of those powerful shirts to wear too. I'm loving it.
Yes, get in good trouble. I was feeling John Lewis's spirit often, but yesterday was also just like, oh, I feel him. And I sent this over to a girlfriend and said, can you make me this shirt? And she did.
Oh, well, it sounds like your career, you've been getting into good trouble. I love it. What a wonderful way to end. Just wonderful.
Simone, thank you so much. You are so inspirational, and I am so grateful that our paths crossed.
Likewise, I'm such a fan, and this was amazing. It was short and sweet, but just rich with so much good, feel-good energy, inspiration, and nuggets of wisdom. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is my hope that you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out the show notes for this episode on the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website by clicking the podcast menu. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tell a friend or two about it.